Configuring controls. Alright, so in this video we're going to take a step back here and really focus on controls themselves. We've already used a few controls up to this point. We took a good look at container controls in a previous video. Now we're really going to focus on, again, controls themselves, the anatomy of controls, properties, their methods, their events, how to use and configure each one of them. And of course, how controls, because controls play such an integral role in building the user interface, we're going to take a good look at how to construct a user interface and use many of the tools and techniques that are built into the .NET framework to help us build a nice user-friendly user interface. Alright, so let's jump into the outline for this video. We're going to start off here with just a quick overview of control configuration. Again, just want to talk about the control itself, define what properties, methods, events are, and take a look at how controls, where they fit in the .NET framework. And I also just want to go through all the different categories of controls out there in the .NET framework that we can use, again, because it's really good. The more controls that you have in your arsenal of skills, the better off you're going to be, because you'll be able to create much more dynamic user interfaces and much more complex user interfaces. So we'll take a good look there at controls themselves, and then we'll jump into an actual demo here, and we'll learn how to configure controls and the user interface. What we're going to do is we're going to pretty much build the user interface from scratch, and we're going to take this user interface and over the next couple of videos, when we get through our data videos and such, we're really going to focus on how to take this user interface from absolutely nothing, a blank form, and turn it in, first of all, to just something simple, a simple user interface, using the controls and the techniques that we're going to learn here to construct that user interface. And then we're going to take it to the next level as we progress through the videos, and eventually it'll be a full-fledged database application that will be an actual useful application that you'll be able to use as well. So we'll start all that madness off right here with configuring controls and the user interface. We'll learn how to build the user interface. And at the end here, we'll take a look at some user interface design guidelines, just some simple guidelines to follow in building user interface that'll really help you save time and of course, hopefully, even more so, build a successful application. Alright, so let's start off here with an overview of control configuration. I just want to talk a little bit about controls. Obviously, here, controls really make up the user interface, right? That's all the user interface is a collection of organized, or at least hopefully organized, controls in a way that the user can use the application, interact with these controls, and hopefully do their jobs or do whatever their goal is to do with the application. So that's all it is, just a collection of controls. So really what controls are objects. Now you're going to hear a lot of these terms here. You're going to hear the term object, you're going to hear the term control, class, component. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, but really I'll just kind of clarify all this now. A class is really, think of a class as a control without an interface, right? It's really just something that sits underneath the hood that we can do. Really, we're going to represent our business models with that. And if that's confusing, we'll clear that up a little later. But just think of a class now as a control without an interface, right? We can just create it and do things. A control, obviously, is something that we would use, we put on a user interface, and we can actually interact with it, or the user can interact with it to do their job, right? If it's a button, they'll click it. If it's a list box filled with items, they'll select the items. If it's a text box, they'll type data into it. So the controls have a user interface. Components are kind of a mixture between classes and controls. They don't have a user interface per se, at least not from the user's perspective. They're really a class from the user's perspective. They just do things. But to the developer, to us, they do have a little interface, something that we work with in design view to make it happen. And I'll give you a good example of that here when we get into our demo, just to give you an idea of what a component's all about. And an object is any one of those three. An object is really an instance, a live instance on a running application of a control, a class, or a component. So I just wanted to get that out of there, and we'll learn about all this stuff as we go. Back to controls here, turning our focus. Controls, in pretty much all objects out there, consist of properties, methods, and events. Or can. It's usually up to the developer's discretion, but controls definitely pretty much always contain properties, methods, and events. And a property defines the appearance of a control, and we've used properties up to this point with controls in previous videos. Methods define the control's functionality, and events define the control's response to user actions. And I like to give the car analogy because everyone knows what a car is these days, so it's a great analogy to use. And if you think of a control, think of a car as a control, its properties would be things such as the color, the size, the height, the width, the make, the model, the interior design, so on and so forth. So those are all things that really define the look and feel of a car. Methods would be actions that the car can perform, or functionality of the car, right? So start would be an action, right? We need to start the car before we can use it, so start would be an action. Stop would be an action. although that would probably be, turn off, turn on or turn off on the engine side. Accelerate is a perfect example for a method because that is what it can do. We push the pedal down, it accelerates, that's a method. And decelerate would be another one. So methods are actions that the car can perform. Events define the control's response to actions, right? So an event on a car would be car started, car accelerating, car decelerating. And of course, one of the actions that I like to use that is one that, hopefully would never happen is car crashed, right? So events are things that can happen on the car. You may not know when they happen, so that's why we need to write code to handle for it. When they do happen, what do we want to do? What kind of action do we want to take? Now, one thing I like to do for fun, and to really get you thinking like a computer programmer here, is turn life into an application and kind of look around you and look at objects or anything around you and try to define its properties, methods, and events. And some things may not have methods or events. And those things, or some things may not have a user interface that we can interact with. That would be a good case for a class, other ones for components, and obviously controls would have a user interface that we could interact with, like a telephone or a TV, things of that nature. So one fun thing I like to do, and again, it gets you thinking like a programmer. Now, one other thing I want to mention here is, this may not make sense first, and it never does to anyone the first time they learn about this stuff, because this is kind of one of the more advanced concepts, but I want to get you thinking about it now into your head, because in the future, this is really what programming is all about, is object-oriented programming. And every single control out there inherits from what's called the control class. And basically what this is this is not something that you can just create and use. You can't create a base control class because it's called a base class. And the reason this is this really saves time, energy, and code in the long run, because this control class contains all the base properties of every single control has, such as location, size, name, things of that nature, all visible, enabled, all those common properties that every single control share, and methods as well, and events. Those are all common things that every control has. So that's why we have a base control class that, again, you can't create by itself. You have to create a control that inherits from it, which would be a button or a list box or a text box or any of the common controls that we've used up to this point. All right. So again, that may not make sense yet, but it definitely will in the future. So over the next couple of videos here, we're going to take a look at many of the different controls in the .NET framework, probably most of them. And what I want to do is just kind of give you a brief understanding of all the different categories we have out there, such as common controls. And these are controls that you will find all over in Windows, all over in most operating systems and applications out there. So that's why they're called common controls. These are things like the button, the list box, the text box, the checkbox, the radio button, so on and so forth. All those commonly used everyday controls. Again, we'll probably cover every single one of those. Container controls, we've obviously taken a video on container controls, so we know what these are all about. Controls that host other controls. Menus and toolbars are pretty straightforward. We'll look at some of those. Data controls, there's a lot of good data controls out there, such as the data grid, the data view, controls that we can bind directly to data sources. We got a video dedicated to using data-bound controls, so we'll take a look at that. Components, as I mentioned before, don't necessarily have a user interface, but they do for the developer in design view that we can work with, and we can see it on the application, so it isn't just invisible. So we'll show you, we'll use many components, such as the timer component. We'll look at the notify icon component, which sits down in the tray here. This is a notify icon right here, things of that nature. We'll look at some printing controls out there, controls that will help us with print previews and also actually printing to the printer. And then we have dialog boxes, very important out there. Dialogs, which are those boxes that open up when you want to save a file or open a file, things of that nature. So we got dialog boxes for colors, for choosing a color, for printing, for again files, opening, saving, such. So these are all the major control categories in the .NET framework, and we're going to take a good look at most of them. Alright, so why don't we jump into a demo here, and what I want to do is show you not only how to generally work with controls, some of these things we've already done, so I'll just briefly touch on them, but I also want to show you how to build a user interface, because that's what we're talking about. When working with controls, that's really what you're doing, is you're constructing a user interface with these controls. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and minimize the whiteboard, and head on down to the Start button, up to Programs, over to Visual Studio 2005, and we'll fire open the integrated development environment here. And I have a project here called 70-526_04 control config. And with this project right now, it's just an empty project with a form. Now, what we're going to do here in this video and then over the next many videos is we're actually going to take this blank form here and we're going to turn it into a full-fledged application. And it's going to evolve over some of the videos. We're going to make some changes to it. We're going to add data functionality to it. And again, by the time we're done, it's going to be a full-fledged data entry application plus a utility application that monitors our SQL servers on our network to ensure that they're up. A real-time monitor. So we're going to take this from nothing to something pretty cool and actually very useful. And again, we'll track all the data, and you know, we'll even, when we get into our printing video, we'll even print information based on this, so we can do trending and reports off all the data that we're going to collect. So we're going to start from scratch here. And the first thing we need to do is, of course, work with controls. Drag controls onto this form and start constructing the user interface. So let's start building here. Let's go ahead and open the toolbox. And let's expand our all Windows Forms controls. So these are all the controls here that we're going to work with currently. And again, there's a couple of ways you can get a control onto a form. And let's start here with kind of our main control that we're going to have driving all of this, a list view. And we're going to cover this. This is more of an advanced control. We'll cover the features of it a little later. But let's just get this on the form. Again, one way to get a control on the form is to click on it, hold your click down, and drag it onto the form. And when you do that, your toolbox will go back over to the left there if it isn't pinned down. And now you can see you can drag this control anywhere. Wherever you put it, and your mouse is, that's where the upper left-hand corner of the control is going to be positioned. And now we can, of course, drag it around. And there we go. So now we can get it onto our form the way we want it to. And the first thing I want to mention here with the control when you're dragging it around is you can see the little blue line there. There's a blue line up top and a blue line to the right. Those are called snap lines. And that's a brand new feature in the .NET 2.0 framework in the Visual Studio 2005 IDE here that really lets us get a visual here. And also you kind of get a feel for it when you're dragging the control around, because it'll kind of snap into place when it's of equal distance from the borders. And we can see that looks good there, so we'll drop that. And of course then you can size these by the handles around the control. And we'll talk about this little arrow right here, this little arrow button. This is actually called the Smart Tag. We'll cover that in a little bit as well. So we got our first control in the form. Everything looks good there. Let's drag another controller on the form. Let's drag your group box on here so we can group some light controls down here. There we are. And there we are. So what we're going to do here is kind of have a master detail look. So this will kind of be our view. We'll have all of our SQL servers listed in here when we get there, which will give us just general data, the name of the server. You know, this is a list view, so we'll have columns in it. And, you know, we'll have the name of the server, the status of the server, maybe some other things, some other metadata about the server on here. So this will kind of be our window into the status of those servers. This down here will be basically the details. So when we click on a server in the list, it'll expand with extra information, detailed information about the item in the list view that is clicked. So we're going to have lots of controls within here. Now let's go ahead and go back into our toolbox here and drag a bunch of those controls on. Now another way to add a control to the toolbox here is you can just double click on it. So if I double click on a text box here, I'm going to double click on it a couple of times. There we go. You can see what it did there. It has actually added them to the top of the form. Now if you highlight the container control and then go in your toolbox and double click on it, it'll put it right inside of that container control, as you can see it did with that text box. So we got some text boxes on here. I'm just going to drag them in here. We'll put 4 in here for now. Right? So we've got some text boxes in here. Let's put some labels in here to describe these text boxes. And you can see just by dragging around, it's really easy to get them to line up because of those snap lines. Those are very handy. And again, that's one of those things that'll save you a lot of time rather than like the old days. What you had to do is, you know, click on a control, find its location property, and find its X and Y coordinates, and then match all these controls up by hand. So you can see it saves a lot of time right off the bat here by having these snap lines. Now we have other methods that will allow us to save some time here when it comes to dealing with controls, setting them up, aligning them properly on our forms, and making them, you know, nice looking. And that is the layout toolbar. And this is right here. And by the way, the layout toolbar does not come on into the IDE by default here. So let me close out of it and show you where it is. What you can do is right-click on this gray area of the toolbar here, or the menu system up here as well. And you want to scroll down until you see the layout toolbar. So these are all our toolbars here. We'll choose layout. It'll pop up, pop into the last known position. If there was no last known position, it'll pop into your toolbar area. And if I'm just going to double-click on it here, so it goes back into the toolbar area where it was here. And this is our layout toolbar. And this is really here to assist us in doing exactly what we just did with the snap lines, only it has quite a bit of flexibility as far as what it can do. Let me show you. Let me give you some examples here. Let's go back into our toolbox, drag a label onto the form here. And what I'm going to do is show you another technique for adding controls. If you have a controls that you have to add a lot of, similar controls that you need to add a lot of, what you can do is you can just copy it. I'll right-click and choose copy. And then we can just paste them in here. So there's a paste, there's a paste, there's a paste. And you can see we've got 3 more labels, a total of 4 on here. So copy and paste is a much, you know, a nice little shortcut there, because now we don't have to go to the